The cubist could never remember the shape of my face. He clasped my chin in his palms and read my cheekbones with his fingers. He did this every day, thumbs tracing borders, a cartographer carving. At night, he colonized them. I splintered into conquered fragments, each stiller than life. My neck extended, snapped, a broken accordion, eyes crumpled into the hollows of a gorgon's mask. My nose funneled out, an exotic fruit. Darkness etched wood grain on skin. Elbows and knees, creased fans of origami. He never looked me in the eye. Instead, he fixed on parts. The arch of my foot, the bow of my lip. I was crystalline, my body a jagged hall of mirrors, endlessly refracting his lonely gaze. All this unwanted light.
Hi, I'm Amanda Chong. I'm a lawyer and poet from Singapore. This is Art Plus Live, an ekphrastic series which invites writers to respond to the works in the National Gallery, Singapore. I am delighted to share my thoughts on the exhibition Georgette Chen at Home in the World, as she is a trailblazer who has inspired me as a fellow woman artist trying to find her place in the world. I started off by reading my poem, The Cubist, because one of my interests as a writer is observing how women are represented in art, especially as women have been excluded from intellectual and public life for centuries. The Cubist is written from the point of view of a disgruntled muse speaking to a male artist who cannot capture her true essence in the painting, but only his idealized image of her. My poem speaks to how women have always been the subjects of art through history, but never the artists themselves, with the freedom to represent who they are in all their shades and tones. Georgette Chen stands in perfect counterpoint to this, a pioneer artist who was the only woman in the cohort of Nanyang artists, yet never felt held back by her gender. Her international upbringing gave her an openness to the world and the confidence to fashion her own identity even amid the shifting tides of revolutions and world wars. Through reading Georgette Chen's letters, I saw a woman stridently defining herself on her own terms, but also actively embracing influences from the surroundings in her art. Out of the many gems in this exhibition, I wanted to focus on Georgette Chen's portrait work because of the intimacy they allow us to have with a woman who was in many ways larger than life. Georgette's portraits give us an insight to her sensitivity as an artist and her ability to receive and capture the essence of someone. First, I turn to Georgette's two self-portraits in the exhibition. I am fascinated by how women artists choose to represent themselves, as the personal is always political. There is so much to be understood about how an artist sees herself or how she wants to be seen by society from a self-portrait. I sense this in my own work as a confessional writer who writes about deeply personal experiences. Georgette Chen's self-portrait from 1934 was painted just as she was beginning to achieve artistic recognition in France at the age of 28. Her portrait reveals her desire to be seen as a serious-minded artist. Her hair is swept into a low bun, and she wears an austere black dress in a Western style. She's not a frivolous ingenue, but a woman who projects sober confidence. Georgette captures her own manifold contradictions in this picture. She looks introspective, as if she's regarding her own image in a mirror without any self-consciousness. Her eyes are slightly narrowed, as if daring the viewer to pass judgment on her. She has rendered herself in soft, loosely fragmented brushstrokes, which give her an air of vulnerability. But with the steel in her gaze, we have no doubt that she's fully in control of what she's choosing to reveal to us. Georgette Chen's self-portrait from 1946 was painted shortly after World War II, prior to her arrival in Malaya. The young widow is in a starched Chinese collar, her fringe curled back. The tight close-up establishes her presence and surety of character. The romantic daubs of color from her earlier self-portrait have given way to a more disciplined style. There are minimal lines defining her hair and face, and only a narrow palette of neutral tones employed. Still, there are subtle dashes of pink, beige, brown, and a pale red on her lips, which give her warmth. Her unbroken gaze and arched eyebrows reflect a sharp woman who is focused on a singular vision. If you could represent yourself in a self-portrait, how would you be looking at the viewer? What qualities or contradictions would you want the viewer to see in you? What would you choose to reveal or conceal? Here is my own self-portrait in poetic form. I wrote a sonnet called Office Lady to satirize the reproductive expectations and stereotypes that society has on high-achieving women. I imagine this must be how some people see me, although I don't entirely agree with it. Office Lady. She's past her days of being called Xiao Mei. Kopi uncles no longer clink their spoons, clamoring to make her afternoon tea. For years, she's battered away suitors' swoons. Now she barely remembers how to flirt. Her breasts are descending further than the hemlines of her G2000 skirt. How will she ever shack up with a man, her mother clucks. She's waited far too long, spent her 20s leaning in the boardroom when women are like biscuits, Will Lau Hong. Assailed by visions of a cobwebbed womb, she winks back at the Bing ogling her legs. Each month she counts down her viable eggs. Next, I turn to Georgette's painting of her beloved first husband, Eugene Chen. Eugene was almost 30 years older than Georgette and was a man of considerable stature as the foreign minister of Sun Yat-sen's Chinese government in exile. Georgette had planned on remaining single and devoting herself to her art until she met this exceptional man who was equally invested in her career as an artist. Eugene Chen became Georgette's favorite subject. Her diaries are littered with references of him posing for her. It seemed he grew more accustomed to his role as an artist's husband over time. In 1935, she wrote, "Began small canvas of portrait, poses so badly and talks all the time." In 1988, she reminisced, "He was always ready to pose for me. That always helps an artist." I love this wall of portraits that Georgette made of Eugene during the dark days of the Japanese occupation. The Chens were placed under house arrest from 1940 to 1944 in Hong Kong and Shanghai due to Eugene's refusal to publicly support the Japanese. During this time, Eugene was Georgette's only companion, and her work was limited to her domestic surroundings. Georgette rendered Eugene with loving scrutiny in a series of close-up portraits. The palette of muted grays and blues she used reflects the claustrophobia of their house arrest. Georgette once wrote, "For who but a wife knows the true likeness of her own husband?" These portraits reveal the deep intimacy that Georgette had with Eugene. We see him as Georgette does in private, a man with his brow furrowed, spectacles in hand, weighed down by the burdens of politics. I have written my fair share of love poems, and I believe that the love of an artist for her beloved is often reflected in determined realism. The desire to portray the beloved in all his resistance, faults, and unexpectedness, because this is what makes him true to life. These portraits were made just before Eugene passed away from illness in 1944. I imagine Georgette trying to remember every contour and inflection of thought that animates Eugene's face with her brushstrokes. As a single woman living in Singapore, portrait commissions became one of the ways that Georgette maintained her independence. In her words, painting portraits put extra butter on her bread and even enabled her to pay the installments for her house. To me, the years spent honing her craft by painting her beloved Eugene gave Georgette the sensitivity and keen observation that is evident in all her portrait work. Georgette would only begin a portrait after she felt familiar with her subject. When Georgette traveled in 1960 to paint a picture of Tunku Abdul Rahman's wife, she wrote, "Painting a portrait is always a crisis with me. I liken the experience to the throes of childbirth." Still, portrait painting was an endeavor that brought Georgette much joy, especially as she often painted her close friends, and it meant hours in their charming company. Georgette saw the completed picture as a synthesis of the artist and sitter's personalities. This idea of a dialogue between sitter and artist comes across in this portrait of fellow artist Rohani. Rohani was Georgette's student at the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. Georgette often drove Rohani back from school, and they developed a deep friendship, often exchanging letters in Bahasa Melayu. Rohani is painted in a vibrant red, with great attention paid to the floral motif on her dress. There is a faraway look in her eyes, as if she is deep in thought. Unlike Georgette, Rohani found it impossible to live on art. At an exhibition in 1975 to celebrate the International Women's Year, where her work was shown alongside Georgette's, Rohani commented, "There are many talented women artists, but when they marry, their talent is left aside. Their attention turns to the home." This further highlights how exceptional Georgette Chen's life was. She was truly a woman ahead of her time. Much like the portraits we have been looking at, poetry isn't interested in telling the whole story. Both poetry and portraiture are focused on taking a snapshot of a moment and revealing the full emotional texture within that moment. Portrait artists hone their craft by creating studies of individual body parts. I thought it would be interesting to translate this practice across art forms into poetry. I invite you to write a poem titled "A Study of Someone's Body Part." For example, you could write "A Study of Grandma's Ear," "A Study of a Construction Worker's Hands," or even "A Study of My Lips," if you prefer to create a self-portrait. Like Georgette Chen's work, your poetic portraits should convey both emotional resonance and physical likeness. Think about conveying a particular mood through colors, images, memories, and sound. What is the essence of that person, their flaws and strengths, that you want us to understand? Like Georgette's work, your poetic portrait should also be a synthesis of the person you're writing about and your feelings about that person. You can be as freely associative and a stream of consciousness as you like. My own poem is a series of unfolding images from gazing into a lover's eyes. Here is my poem. A study of your eyes. What the sea was before it learned its own name, a howling world torn from sky, wrestling with blue. Deeper still, twin conscious asleep on a jagged coast, swirled tight, wet with secrets. The shells fan open, ripple into boulders skimmed by a stream frothing with lichen. A woman dips her hands in suds, caresses a chip on a china teacup, till the nub of loss dwells in her fingers. The house wraps its silences around the woman's aches, hemming her in. Remember the way only sleep could unstitch us? You'd pull close to me in half shadow, then suddenly you were enfolded in stars. Your eyelids a constant flicker of knowing and unknowing.
Street lamps thread through our city at dusk, a seam of light quivering with 1,000 futures all at once. We could have settled into everyone.
Hello, my name is Avril. I found this exercise to be incredibly challenging, yet fulfilling. This is definitely not within my comfort zone. A study of my neighbor's hair. Long veins of licorice free diving to her back, worn with steely confidence. It's a look, more likely a snack. A small piece of elastic, the flavor changes. Experienced fingers braid and weave into loaves of bread. I'm left dreaming of 3-course meals, and lamingtons come to mind when plaits become a pony and white flecks descend. As the head swiftly turns, the beast gallops in an arc and whips across my face and into my eyes, sharp ends grazing onto parted lips wanting sweet, but instead gifted with a fading appetite.
I'm Rupa Diwan, and my poem is inspired by Chua Maite's painting, A Road Construction Worker, done in 1955. Here goes. A study of a road construction worker's shoulders. Sit. You look tired of working, of building, of lifting. Your slumped shoulders raise, that worried frown erase. Sit, push back those shoulders and reveal your hollow gut, protruding veins, emblems of resignation to a complicit fate. Sit, raise those shoulders again. There are civilizations to grow, economies to sustain, roads to build, all leading to homes that you can never own. Nay, sit, with your slumped shoulders, embodying the narrative of trauma, exhaustion, and exclusion. Sans authority, sans autonomy, sans control. A citizen of the country of longing, never being, never belonging.
Hello, I'm Rosie Wee, and I'll be reading my poem, A Study of Georgette Chen's Face. The prompt for this poem is Self-Portrait by artist Georgette Chen, painted in 1946, 2 years after the death of her husband, Eugene Chen. What struck me about this portrait is the vivid construct that goes beyond the naturalistic representation of herself. It's as if the artist is saying to you, look at me, a woman in my own right, no longer a grieving widow. Writing from a third-person point of view, the poet addresses the artist as if she's still alive. I'll now read to you the poem. What resilience, what sense sublime, your face launch it all. The defiant eyes, the pouting lips, the coiffed hairdo and pastel cheeks. Live your life. Think less of me, Eugene had said, before the angels came and winged him gently into the night. Like the proverbial phoenix, you have risen from the ashes of grief, resurrected your brushes and paints to ignite the world with the master's touch.
Thank you for watching an Ekphrastic series. You can share your own poetry responses with the hashtag GalleryAnywhere in the comment section or on Instagram. I'd love to see what kind of poetic portraits you come up with. You can find me on my website, amandachong.com, or on Instagram as A Sense of Falling. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the Georgette Chen exhibition as much as I did.